All right, we're recording. All right, good morning. This is Benjamin with Teach Me to Dive. I'm a technical dive instructor and I live in Idaho. Yes, in Idaho. But if that sounds a little eclectic and a little different for you, then you're going to in for a treat. We're speaking today with Alex from Dive Alaska. Yes, there's diving in Alaska. It's amazing. And I'm super excited to talk to Alex and learn all about the uniqueness of diving in Alaska. Alex, thank you for coming on.
Hey, thank you for having me.
So Alex, let's just jump into it. How did you get started in diving?
So I was a bit non-traditional as far as getting started in diving. I had an older sibling when I was in high school who got into it, and long story short, he just wouldn't stop talking about it. And so at 13 years old, I said, anything you could do, I could do better. Ended up going into my first dive class, kept doing it, went to college. During college, started teaching diving to pay for college. Graduated college, decided I never wanted to be an accountant, and just kept teaching diving. And it was all downhill from there.
Now, was that all in Alaska?
No, most of that was in Southern California,
Okay, we're in Southern California.
in Los Angeles, Orange
Okay.
County.
So how long have you been with Dive Alaska?
So I've been with Dive Alaska coming up on 6 years now.
Right on. Now, what brought you to Alaska for diving?
Yeah, so when I first started teaching diving, I was a traveling instructor. So I would go from one place to another for about 3 months at a time and bounced all over the place. And then in that process, came up to Alaska, worked up here for about 3 months, and fell in love with the diving. And long story short, I was in North Carolina. I was heading over to Israel to work over there for a while, and got a phone call from the owners of Dive Alaska saying, hey, do you want to come up here full time and take on the training director role for the shop? And I couldn't resist, just because the diving was so spectacular. I haven't seen anything like it anywhere else.
Wow, that's quite a story. So what in Israel and ended up in Alaska? Those are pretty polar opposites, literally.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
That's pretty amazing. So let's talk about it. What certifications can you teach and what's your current level?
So I am a PADI Course Director, and I train most everything. I don't train in technical diving, not so much from a lack of desire to do it, more just from a lack of time. Every time I start trying to be able to get into it, I don't have the time to be able to pursue the classes because I'm too busy teaching. That said, fortunately at the shop here, we have a ton of amazing technical instructors, so it keeps it easy. So most of what I do is just recreational scuba training and a lot of instructor training.
Excellent. So now who's your inspiration for diving other than your brother? I can do it better.
Yeah, right. So as far as a lot of my inspiration for diving, it's hard. It comes down to a lot of individual instructors and course directors I've worked with over the years, free diving, scuba, technical diving, as well as the public safety side of it. That said, as far as inspiration, one of the books that really inspired me when I was first getting into diving, to especially move into the technical field, Sheck Exley, and everything he did, everything he wrote, all of his pursuits, the way that he views caves, and just understanding the beauty of the rock formations and the aquifer as a whole has been a huge inspiration for me as diving, and goals for me as far as what I want to see, what I want to do, and how to talk to people to try to inspire more individuals to get into the sport.
That's amazing. Now, that's something you wouldn't think about in Alaska. At least I didn't until I started really following you guys, was caves in Alaska. So there's some underwater caves, isn't there?
Yeah, so it's one that it's very, very new and very, very almost a feral ground for Alaska, just because the difficulties of diving in Alaska, a lot of it comes down to access. And so Alaska has a lot of volcanic action. It has a lot of limestone in various places. That said, as far as exploring caves, it's just very difficult to get to these places, from logistically of getting in the water when it's a freezing cave with a river in it, to just all of the things that are involved with getting anywhere in Alaska when the only access is by plane or a 20-hour boat ride, just because the state is so big, to a town that barely has a hotel, if it even does much less a fill station and everything. So we're traveling when we're moving and trying to explore places. We're traveling with everything and really putting together large expedition vessels if we're going to do anything like that.
Sure. Tell me about the last cave you dove there. That's extremely interesting.
As far as caves up here, very, very little. Most of the cave diving we're doing is like most people in the world, where we're trying, well, at least in the United States, where we're either going down to Mexico or heading down to Florida just to play in a lot of those systems there. As far as stuff we have up here, all of them are pushing stuff, trying to see sea caves. And right now we're exploring dry caves. And so a lot of us are trying to get into climbing and improve our climbing skills, our rope work, so that we can start doing a little bit of spelunking and seeing where caves are at. But right now we're really not diving or pushing any caves just because of the logistical difficulties that, combined with running and operating a dive shop and inspiring other people to do the same, ends up being a time question more than anything else.
Fair enough. I understand. So how did you end up becoming an instructor?
So ended up becoming an instructor. I was working at a program when I was in college and was leading a dive club. And with that, well, was working to lead with a dive club. And with that, just started diving. And more diving led to people asking me to lead dives. And more people asking me to lead dives ended up the shop being like, hey, can we just pay you to lead dives? And then me saying, well, you technically can't. And then being, hey, okay, then we'll let's make you a dive master. And then as a dive master, hey, let's make you an instructor so that you can be able to work with this. And one step led to another. It actually happened more naturally than I expected. It was one of those where, like most kids who are young in college, the budget wasn't really there, and ended up got really, really well taken care of from a dive shop that basically gave me gear for a year to rent. And so they charged me $100 to rent equipment for a year. And I put about 300 dives on that set of gear. And after that, was able just to accumulate the dives, accumulate the time to start teaching, and then paying off and getting that gear eventually and paying everything off and being able to go from there.
Neat. So you're an instructor. You've instructed all over the world. Now in Alaska, what's the most important thing you've learned about diving?
Wow. As far as the most important thing to learn about diving, I think there's a lot. It's a very large question, but to focus on one thing, I think there is a blend between excitement and experience that really makes for spectacular diving and makes it so you can enjoy the most, be the most excited about it, as well as also keeping yourself safe, keeping your dive buddies safe, and just combining those two things. So obviously excitement, understanding the passion, trying to find beauty in everything, even if you're diving a lake that has 10 feet of visibility and it's a silty bottom, there's stuff to see, there's stuff to explore. In worst case scenario, there's always opportunity to improve. That's where the sport is amazing. Is it's not easy by any stretch, but it is fairly easy to get into it, and you can always get better. And so you can always improve, but at the same time, you're improving so that you can see and enjoy being underwater more. So there's obviously a million things to be able to focus on with diving, but I would say that blend between experience and just enthusiasm for underwater really makes some spectacular divers and some pretty spectacular stuff to be seen.
That's awesome. So tell me about Dive Alaska.
So Dive Alaska, there are a number of dive shops in Alaska, and it's really fun because we all get along, we all run stuff together. For Dive Alaska itself, we're located in Anchorage, Alaska. We have Prince William Sound right nearby. Cook Inlet, I should say, right nearby. And with Cook Inlet, we don't dive there. There's a 30-plus foot tide swing, and it's just full of silt. And so basically at low tide, you can walk across it, and at high tide, it's 20 feet of water, 30 feet of water. And so it ends up being pretty scary water. So we're usually driving for most of our dive sites. In the wintertime, our lakes are frozen half of the year. So there's a lot of lakes nearby that are good diving, but most of the time we're driving down to either Prince William Sound in Whittier or Resurrection Bay in Seward. And we'll even head down to Homer, which is about a 5-hour drive. But most of our dives are about an hour to 2.5 hours away. And as far as the shop, we are in a place that nobody looks to. People forget Alaska exists, it feels like, because we are stuck doing a lot of stuff on our own. And so we're doing full dry suit repair every day. We have to repair most every brand. We're working on hoses, working on compressors. Most of us are working on boats. A lot of us have various aspects of first responder medical training, because when we go to our dive sites, sometimes we're an hour to 2 hours from help. And then obviously everything to manage the cold. All we do is dive dry suit year round. In the summertime, the warmest we get is about 55 degrees at the surface, which means the bottom's still about 45 for us, even in the summer. Mm-hmm. And so we're dry suit year round. In the winter, our ocean is a lovely 36 degrees. And we do a ton of ice diving. And so it's pretty amazing, because we're a little further away, so it keeps us very self-sufficient on stuff. But it also gives us a lot of diversity and experience in what we can do, what we get to explore. It's fun because a day-to-day, we'll teach a class, then go hydro tanks, then repair a set of rigs, then work on a dry suit, then go do a quick clinic at night, then go to a school to talk about it, then work with commercial divers and gold dredgers in the afternoon. And so it ends up being a nice diversity of everything that we can do up here. So it makes it a lot of fun.
Wow, that is quite the diversity, that's for sure. It's so on your dives in the ocean out in Prince William Sound, how's the visibility?
So it depends. In the summertime, we have a really nice algae bloom. And this is part of what makes diving in Alaska so amazing, is we have one of the largest, most sustainable fisheries in the world. Mm-hmm. And there's an entire ecosystem to support it. So people think cold water, not much life, and it's the opposite. It's just mind-blowing on the amount of stuff to see. So in the summer, we have a really large algae bloom, which does destroy our visibility, especially in coastal sites. If we're taking a boat somewhere, usually we're pretty consistent. So right now, Smitty's Cove is our main dive site out of Whittier. And with that cove, it's a shore dive site, very easy access. It's where we run most of our courses this time of year. And right now it's about 60 to 80 feet of visibility. And wow. So pretty nice, pretty spectacular. Come summertime, it will be hand in front of your face visibility, and not reading your gauges on your arms until you have them pressed against your mask and you're looking at everything through that box. So in the summertime, we spend a lot more time in Resurrection Bay, where this time of year, Resurrection, if we're taking a boat out, we will have 80 to 200 feet of visibility, depending on where you're at on some of these far out sites. And in the summer, very consistently 50 to 80 feet of visibility out there, just once we take a boat out to get away from where that tidal exchange is pushing everything into shore.
Wow. So tell me about what you see. There's an amazing amount of stuff to see. What's the most interesting thing to see out there?
So there's a ton. A lot of the stuff that's really interesting is very difficult to get to. That said, the stuff that's really interesting that is nearby is just the biodiversity. The entire bottom is full of life, from tube worms to piles of nudibranch to any different type of anemones, starfish, urchins, anything that's living on the bottom. It's just amazingly diverse, and there's a ton of stuff going on. And it all depends on where you're diving as far as what you want to see. Obviously, it's Alaska, so you can go on a dive and see monster halibut, to going on a dive and watching schools of salmon spawning and everything swimming upstream. We also have a lot of really nice wrecks as far as stuff that's easy to access. We only have a couple. In the summertime, we do a lot of time out on the Fox Island barge, which is this old military barge. It was converted to a fishing vessel. It lit on fire. It smelled horrible, so they pulled it into the water. But it's out on an island, and so what we'll do in the summertime is we go out there, and we'll have anywhere between 10 and 50 divers camping on the island, and we just camp on the island and dive this barge. It's in 10 to 100 feet of water, really easy access. We walk in, and just holds a ton of life, from all the kelp that's on it to the lingcod. There's a bunch of octopus that live on it when we have the giant Pacific octopus up here mostly. And so these guys will get bigger than me. I mean, you'll see them 6 feet across easily. And so they're just beautiful. And then all of the rockfish, the sea lions, whales going offshore, and everything along those lines. So it really depends on what people are looking to get into, but there's a little bit of everything for Alaska to offer. It just depends on how hard you're looking to work to get there.
Wow. I would have never guessed that you had that kind of biodiversity. A giant octopus sounds amazing. I love octopus anyway. So
Oh yeah, they're the best.
definitely neat. So I'm getting ready to come up to Alaska, and how should I prepare to dive with you in Dive Alaska?
Yeah, so if you're looking to come up here and dive, the best way to prepare is dry suit time. And ideally dry suit time in heavy undergarments. It's very different diving a dry suit with nothing underneath than it is to dive your dry suit with lots of heavy undergarments. And so really making sure that you're working with, hey, that additional weight to weigh you down when you're that floaty. After that, time experience is always a win, but then having an idea on what you want to see, what you want to do. We have a lot of people who want to come up here to see whales. It's very difficult to see whales up here. We have no chase laws. And so if they come by, awesome, then it's spectacular. Obviously, there are a ton of whales and a lot of really large life up here, but it's not something we can hunt after. We can't drop a boat near a whale, which is good. And so it's one of those where decide on what you want to do. Anything from, hey, I want to see a couple wrecks. I'm really looking to get into photography stuff. I really want to dive the glacier. I want to do something that's Alaska unique. And so whatever that is, I always tell people is once you have the experience, once you have the time in a dry suit, the goal is just decide what you want and then give yourself time. Always give yourself time. If you're planning on diving one day, give yourself a day on the front end and a day on the back end, because you're going to go to a place to dive. And all the sites we're diving at, you have mountain ranges all around you. There's beautiful hiking, there's beautiful fishing, there's beautiful everything. And so it's just going to be giving yourself time to work, because sometimes it's difficult if the weather's bad, like anywhere else, to get in the water some days. So having a little bit of flexibility is huge as well.
Amazing. Now you brought up something, glacier diving. That's not something I think many people have considered. Tell me about glacier diving. That sounds neat.
Yeah, so glacier diving is one of the things that we love to do. It's one of the things that's also a little more on the, I don't use the word risky, but I do like to use the word dangerous, because there is risk when we're on a giant chunk of moving ice. And so a lot of people expect to dive at the tail race of a glacier, basically where the glacier ends or where the glacier is falling into the ocean. We'll never do that. Basically, the glaciers are constantly calving or breaking off into the water. And because of that, it's a really dangerous place to be, as the glaciers are falling off into the water or into a lake, into land, ocean, whatever it is. And so we won't dive there, but what we started doing is the glaciers will form pools in the center of the glacier. And basically where different areas of heat and glacial moraine are melting their own holes, water is always flowing through the glacier as it melts, and it will form these pools inside the glacier. And we found pools that are 100+ feet deep with glacier tunnels and systems going through it, and they're constantly changing. So what we do is we drive up north and we load all of our gear onto a helicopter, and we do a low altitude flight out to a glacier, drops us off. And when we're doing exploration stuff, sometimes we'll have climbing gear with us as well, and we'll, be rappelling into spots. We really don't do that when people are coming up to do this with us, but we will drop off on a pool in the glacier and dive it. And it's crystal clear water. It's take your regulator out and drink it. And it just creates some amazing structure, because you'll have these spikes that get formed on the bottom of the glacier, little caverns and caves that are going all through, ice bridges that are underwater, and everything's just white and blue. And so it really is spectacular. It's a solid 32.5 degrees year round. And so it makes for some pretty chilly diving, but you're just in the middle of the glacier and exploring it and diving it. Now, It's one where we take a lot of precautions, but there's always risk. These glacial pools can always open up and drain. And we're on a pool in 50 feet of water, say, but there's still 1,000, 2,000 feet of ice below us. And so if these pools drain, you're going into that. And so obviously the liability paperwork for it is very similar to the liability paperwork you would see if you got into base jumping, but it's one of those where we do our best to calculate glaciers. We only dive pools that are draining regularly. So stuff that we see with a constant flow out, we won't dive fresh pools because we don't want to ever get into something that is going to fill and then pull and create what we call a moulin, where basically this pool drains. So it ends up being a lot on our end from a planning perspective, but a ton of fun when we actually get into the water and a chance to explore and doing everything we can to make sure we can keep it as safe as possible, because it really is a spectacular form of diving.
That's amazing. I'm hooked. I'm ready to come up and join you. That's for sure. So,
oh yeah.
Tell me about your favorite dive, and why was it your favorite dive?
So my favorite dive actually in the world is in Alaska. There's an island. It's about a 3-4 hour or 5 hour, depending on how fast your boat is, boat ride out. There's an island called Knight Island, which is a pretty large island, but off that island, there's a pinnacle. And the pinnacle comes up to about 50 feet of water and then drops down to about 300. Now, I was doing a technical dive on it, so we were going down only to about 200 feet, 180 feet on this dive. But this pinnacle is something you obviously can't see from the surface because it's 50 feet underwater. It's pretty close to the middle of a bay. It catches a fairly large current, but you drop down, and as you're dropping down, the bottom just glows. And it's glowing because we have the white plume nose anemone, the Nutridium, basically the large cauliflower looking things. Mm-hmm. And it's just covered in that top to bottom. And so you drop down and they're massive. And it's like you're dropping down onto a mountain with 3 feet of snow on it. You just start seeing this glow underneath you, and you look down and it's just anemone going all the way down, covering every inch of this pinnacle. And it ends up having a really interesting geological formation just because it's a pinnacle in the middle of the ocean. So it has a lot of contours and stuff cut into it, but then a lot of bouldering and different pieces where the rock is broken off. And so you can swim through it, and you have little boulders, little caverns as you're going through, and it's covered in octopus, basket stars, which are a starfish. Their head looks kind of like a pumpkin, arms spread out, but then their arms multiply. And so I always tell everyone, like, look up a basket star. They're one of the most alien looking things you've ever seen. But there'll be basket stars that are 3-4 feet across with their arms reaching out, just covering all of these Nutridium. And basket stars, monster lingcod, sea lions dive bombing on you, sea otters coming through the area, pulling up urchins, pulling up scallops. And everywhere around you is just lingcod, rockfish, halibut, everything swimming, moving. Not to mention, when you start looking closely at stuff, some of the largest sun stars I've ever seen. And just piles of arms, massive sun star, tons of color, tons of nudibranch life, very diverse nudibranch life as well, just covered in opalescence nudibranchs, which are one of my personal favorites just because they're super beautiful. And it's in the middle of nowhere. And so it's one of those that's pretty spectacular because you drop out, you're looking around you, it's ocean everywhere. There's an island off to the distance, and then you drop down and it's just teeming with life as soon as you go under. And so I would probably say that's my favorite dive site in the world. I really have nothing else that can convince me of seeing something that's even close to it. It's just mind-blowing on the life.
That's amazing. Other than that, have you encountered anything particularly interesting in marine life during your dives in Alaska that just completely unexpected?
Yeah, so as far as unexpected, we will see the ones that tend to be that I would define as the most unexpected we'll always have, and this isn't one that I've personally encountered, we'll have like a stray turtle make it up here. And those are obviously very unexpected. The salmon sharks that are up here, which are expected, but also amazing to dive with and see, are always a joy to be able to get into the water with. The ones that are usually most surprising, though, is when sea lions will show up. So we have a lot of stellar sea lions up here, and they're amazing. They are generally extremely friendly, but they're friendly in the same way that a pit bull is friendly. And so it's going to play with you, but it's going to play slightly on the aggressive side. So just like seals and sea lions do anywhere else, right? Nipping at your hood, grabbing on your fin. And up here, they really love our DPVs. And so when we're driving scooters underwater, I had an open water class that I was actually teaching, and it was in Smitty's Cove. And this was a number of years back. This was probably 3 years ago. And I was teaching a class, and a bunch of my dive buddies were doing a scooter dive. And I'm teaching my class, and I start seeing sea lions. And so I have the whole class. I'm like, hey, come down. Let's go to the bottom. Let's watch them. And obviously, new open water class, so I don't want anyone to be startled by a sea lion coming in really hot, because these are stellars. I mean, most of them are 1,000 pounds or plus. And so they're really large, 6 to 10 feet long for the most part on this group that we were looking at. And one of my usual dive buddies drives by with a DPV, and he just has a vortex of sea lions. There was about 15 in the group spinning around him and playing with him as they're chasing it. And so he's doing laps around this class, and we just have sea lions going through there. As far as one of the more surprised I've been would be along the same lines was a night dive I was doing. We were exploring a dock and trying to find some old wreckage that was near the dock, and my dive buddy was just moving slow. And I didn't know why, because his scooter was so much better than mine. And he's moving slow, moving slow. I wait for him, he catches up. I wait for him, he catches up. And finally, I turn around to ask him what's wrong, and there's just a sea lion on his fin. And so he's swimming on his scooter, and the sea lion's holding on his fin, playing tug-of-war with him, using his fin and playing tug-of-war against his DPV as they're pulling each other in the water. And so as far as surprising, I would usually say those guys, because they sneak up on you really quickly, and they love to play, and they're extremely sociable. And so it ends up being startling for one, because all of a sudden you just have sea lion in your face. But a lot of times ends up being super rewarding.
That's wild. It's something certainly, inland divers like us and other divers other places we just never consider about. But I mean, I think all of us get the idea that there is a lot of dangerous wildlife in Alaska. So sea lions, obviously. Bears, is that an issue that you have to deal with during diving?
Yeah, so it's something we always consider, and it always depends. So when we're doing a lot of guided dives, even when we go out onto some of these islands, when we're traveling and when we're exploring, we always are prepared for bears in some capacity. So we generally have bear spray. Usually it's a shore problem. So a lot of times we're going to places in the middle of nowhere, and then there's a bear. Hopefully it's not an underwater problem. That would be horrifying. And so we'll have bears. We're usually actually more nervous about moose, believe it or not. Bears, especially in more of the rural places, which we're usually diving in places that don't see people as often, because we're not diving in Anchorage for the most part. And so the bears are fairly skittish. They're really not used to us, and so generally all the noise that people make usually scares them off. That said, we're always ready for it. We've had 1 or 2 issues. That said, moose are, it's not proper to say moose are dumb, but moose aren't terribly smart. They're cows, and so they're right around the same line as cows. And so where moose will struggle is they're everywhere, and just wrong place at the wrong time, and you'll be like, oh, there's a moose 10 feet away from me. And how that moose reacts is then running from there. So a lot of times we're worried about that. As far as in water, it's actually really fortunate. And we have salmon sharks, which are extremely, extremely docile despite their relation to great whites, and extremely docile, extremely friendly, really awesome to dive with. And then sea lions. And obviously there's like orca whales and stuff like that, but despite being frightening at times, they're fairly safe. And so yeah, it ends up being one where we try to stay away from bears, but usually bears do a good job of staying away from us. And with the exception of a close call with a moose or two, even And that's just because they wander. I mean, one was in the hospital 2 days ago. And so they just wander. And so just being in the wrong place at the wrong time with moose is one that we're always looking out for. But bear spray works on moose too.
Fair enough. And pro tip for you. I didn't realize,
Yeah.
think of that, because we dive Yellowstone quite a bit, my wife and I, and we have had a random bison hang out on the beach where we're getting ready to do our exit. So we have to certainly move down the beach a little bit. You know, as you might guess, a bison's 2,000 pounds.
Oh yeah.
And doesn't really particularly have a desire to be friendly with you. Now, I have heard stories that moose can dive up to 30 feet down. I don't know if that's true, but I read that somewhere.
It is true. I have never seen it. We've seen them swimming occasionally, which is surreal to see them. They pretty much doggy paddle, and so you'll see them going through the water occasionally if you're diving at the right place at the right time. I have never seen one dive. I've always wanted to, and we have seen parts and pieces, and people have come up with parts and pieces of like, hey, there's, a moose skeleton underwater in 20 feet of water, and the question comes in, did a hunter clean a moose and dump it there, or did the moose swim and something get it while it was swimming? Who knows? And so, or did it just drown and then sink there? And so it has happened, but I have never personally seen it, unfortunately. I would love to, but most of time and place is tough.
Fair enough. Bucket list dive for both of us then.
Right.
Dive with a moose.
Exactly.
I'll let you know if it happens for me.
Yeah, I'd love to see it. Get a video.
Yeah, that's always the problem. The greatest dives are always the ones that you don't have a GoPro with you, right?
I know, right? It's how you make the fish bigger, though. So sometimes it's nice.
Fair enough. I was lucky this weekend. We dove with the sturgeon, and I took my GoPro specifically, wondering what I was going to see, and I was able to videotape the 6-foot sturgeon. So I was like, yes, I remember my GoPro.
Good.
So Alex, tell me, what contribution do you think you've made to the dive community as a whole?
Ooh, that's a tough question. That's a question I would love to ask the dive community. I'd like to think just inspiring people to dive and getting out there and exploring. So it's one where for us up here, it's really interesting. 90% of the people we work with are local. We're always excited to have people come and visit, but just the difficulty of logistics, as well as the stuff that the state has to offer, we're always more and more excited when we see everyone coming to explore Alaska, but most of what we deal with is locals. And where that's been really fun is seeing a dive community develop in Alaska. Now it's ebbed and flowed like any dive community does as far as how many people are diving, but as the world is improving dry suits, as people are seeing more that's underwater, more and more people are getting into diving to enjoy it. And obviously COVID had a huge impact where people started diving local more throughout COVID. And so one of the things that actually for us was an inspiration when we came up here was how Silfra had developed their dive community up there, over there technically from where we're at, and where Silfra started getting people to be inspired to dive in cold water. And usually people, when they think diving, you're thinking Belize and Fiji and Cabo, and those are amazing places to dive. That said, cold water generally as a whole has more biodiversity. It has more stuff to see. Now, it's not a school of colorful Garibaldi that's going to swim by you, but you are going to have a lot more diverse bottoms and a lot more things to see by the time you start looking for it. And so I would like to think, and my goal is to inspire people to be able to see that, to want to strive for what most would consider more difficult diving, because it's not swimsuit weather, and diving a dry suit is extremely difficult. Diving a dry suit in heavy undergarments is extremely difficult. Not to mention all the logistics that go into diving in a new place in general. And so if there's anything that would be a goal that I would hope would be the answer from the community, would be to show people that diving in cold water and local, and cold water in general for those who aren't local, is worth it. and just because it may be harder, it may be more difficult, it may be tougher access, but the reward is there. And as our world keeps moving, it is an unexplored frontier in diving. I mean, if we're looking for new dive sites, new shipwrecks, new cave systems, whatever it is, the place to look is going to be the place that people haven't been. And so trying to get people to see that and carry that on to explore in places that are just more unique and have a ton to offer, which is what makes it nice.
That's neat. So, Alex, what are you particularly known for?
In what context?
As a diver.
Most of what I do is teaching, training director. I was working through, I usually see 100 to 300 divers a year of every level. I'll travel and teach a lot, and then a bunch of exploration stuff and starting to work on projects as the diving community up here grows and is able to start facilitating that. And so starting to work on projects, and then most of my free time is trying to do whatever I can to get outside. And so not only playing with free diving and teaching free diving, but then also getting people out. Fishing is obviously a very large sport in Alaska. And so encouraging people to free dive when they're fishing. And so getting into spearfishing and getting into exploring the state through that way. And then just doing a little bit of everything after that. So it's Alaska. So the skiing, the snowboarding, snow machining, ice climbing, rock climbing, even, I mean, the skydiving up here is beautiful when the season's right, and the paragliding is amazing. And so just trying to do a little bit of everything and enjoying the outside.
Right on. So what are the best seasons or months to come scuba diving with you in Alaska?
Yeah, so it depends. We only dive the glaciers in the summer because they're frozen, and flying ice equipment out to cut a hole in the ice in the winter on a glacier by a helicopter is just a lot of work. And so we only really dive the glaciers in the summer. In the summer, we have a lot more life because we will have a 10 to 20 degree temperature swing in our ocean. And that brings in a lot of life. And in the winter, it takes a lot away. That has two effects. One, in the winter, we have amazing viz. Our visibility is just downright spectacular in the winter. In the summer, we have a ton of life and a ton of stuff to see. It's also a lot more enjoyable. The sun doesn't set, so you can do a night dive at midnight and it's still bright outside. And so you can dive at all hours of the day. Most of us just don't sleep for a few months because people are going all the time. And so it all depends on what you're looking to do. As far as life and biodiversity, we see a lot more in the summer. As far as good, clear visibility, we see a lot more in the winter. And in the swing season, in the spring and the fall is when it gets interesting. So our weather can also be good or bad. Right now, we have a ton of snow coming down out of nowhere. We had a massive storm come in. We had to cancel all of our dives. There were 20 divers doing a bunch of different classes yesterday. And we had to cancel all of our classes yesterday because the weather just came in too hard. And that really only happens to us in the spring season, in the spring or in the fall. It only happens once or twice a year, but we just can't predict it. And so it comes in, and it comes in hard, and then the weather is tough. So that said, it's also, life is coming into all of our dive sites right now. So we still have good visibility, but there's also more creatures starting to show up. So in the spring and fall, it's really spectacular as well. And to be honest, my favorite personally time of year to dive is about a month from now. Will be, so late May, early June is my personal favorite time because the water's still fairly cold, which means we still have fairly decent visibility. That said, all of the fish are starting to move shallow again. So halibut start showing up, rockfish start showing up. We'll start seeing salmon moving around, even if they're small. And so we start seeing a lot of these animals coming in. And so a lot of stuff is moving. And the visibility is still good, so you can see it, where in the summertime, our visibility will drop down. Right around 20 feet is what we consistently can expect for most of our dive sites, even if they are shore-based. but we don't have to take a boat out to drop down into 100 feet of visibility. We can get that just a little ways offshore. So usually I would say about a month from now is the best, but there's something to offer all times of the year.
Excellent. So you touched on something for a moment there with wintertime. You guys lose the sun in the wintertime, isn't that right?
Yeah. Yep.
So all these beautiful, amazing winter dives in the ocean where you get this 200 feet of viz, those are all night dives then.
So not exactly. So we're fortunately in a good place where we're not complete darkness. Now we will go up and we'll teach up north where it will be dark all day, or an hour of sunlight. We get pretty consistently about 5 to 6 hours of sunlight in the winter.
Okay.
And so we do have diving. It's just a very small window. So very rarely are we doing more than 2 dives in the winter, because we will drop down. It's amazing viz, and then it's dark. And it's actually interesting when we drive for classes in December, we'll drive down and it's nighttime, and we'll drive back and it's nighttime, because we're driving down at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning, and we're coming back at 3 and the sun is set. And so, or setting. And so it's really beautiful, but at the same time, it is very dark in the winter. So we have a small window. Fortunately, we're still far enough south though, where we get about 5 to 6 hours of sunlight, even in the winter, that we can use to work with. But we do a lot of night dives.
Fair enough. So we talked a lot about cold water diving, the ocean's 33, 34 degrees, 10 degrees shift, and things like that. I guess the magic question for the rest of us out here that aren't as hardy as Alaskan divers, what dry suit do you personally dive in?
Oh, it's a hard question from a shop's perspective. So the best gear, I always tell everyone, the best gear that you can have is the gear you have and the gear that you're diving. That is the best equipment you can always have. Dive it, and then it's great. Personally, for me, I prefer tri-laminate.
Okay.
And the reason I prefer tri-laminate suits is because I can adjust my layers. We have a temperature swing. One, there's large flexibility in them, so I can move back. I can manipulate valves when I'm doing technical dives a little easier. And tri-laminate suits these days have very good durability as well. And so my personal suit, I've got about 2,200 dives on it now. I replaced the zipper last year, and besides that, it's been little holes here or there that I've had to work on, but it's treated me really well. And I've had it for about 6 years now, 6 years now.
What brand is it?
So, say again?
What brand is it? Now I'm curious.
That suit is a DUI FLX.
Okay.
So it's a DUI Flex. Most of what we're using up here, and again, it doesn't mean that it is the best. It's just where our shop is at. What we found works. What works well is DUI, Santee, and Scuba Pro. Scuba Pro has a lot of suits that are awesome that a lot of our working divers use, and just because the cost point on them is a little better, not having to spend $4,500 to fancy up a suit and make it exactly like you want is really nice. Having something that's going to be a very good suit, but not quite at the premium suit price, like we would call it, for some of the higher end DUI and Santee suits. And so, yeah, they've treated us really well and run really well for us. And yeah, but at the end of the day, the best suit you're going to have is the suit you dive. If it's a local dive shop that has it or supports it, they're going to have something that they can service and work on and get everything set on. And that's really what matters the most. For us, we work and repair on suits. We're modifying suits all the time, and shorten a sleeve here, lengthening a leg there. And it's just whatever you can use to make sure it works for you. If your suit is interfering with you diving, then you need to get a new suit. But aside from that, there's no wrong turns. Everything has a benefit somewhere.
Fair enough. I like the shop at your local dive shop as well. I really appreciate that, and I think that's got to be a clear, consistent message.
They'll support you. Yeah, that's what matters at the end of the day, is making sure you have someone to support you, because gear always has problems. No matter what it is, I don't care how good it is. There's always going to be a problem somewhere. No one's perfect, and if you're diving it, you're going to put some use on it. So making sure you have support for you.
That's awesome. So undergarments, you talk about having thicker undergarments. What do you wear?
So personally, I wear a skin tight layer. So I'm a princess when it comes to cold. I hate being cold. Most of my diving career was started in Southern California, and even down there, I wore a dry suit. I wear a dry suit when we're going down to Egypt for a few weeks this fall, and I'm going to be in my dry suit in Egypt the whole time. And so I hate being cold. So I wear a base layer, a skin tight layer. Scuba Pro makes a skin tight layer that I really like. I can't think of the name of it right now. And I wear that against my skin. And then I wear a fourth element second layer on my legs and on my top. And then I wear a heated Santee BZ 400 with heated gloves on top of all of that. And then I carry a 30 amp hour battery on my side that charges my entire heating system. That's what I use for the winter, and that keeps me fairly comfortable. I mean, that's 2-3 hours underwater, if not more, as long as my heating's working. 2-3 hours underwater, if not more, and I am comfortable. One that really catches us that ends up being the problem for diving in Alaska in the winter is that the water's never colder than 32. It can't be, otherwise we're not diving it. And so what the problem is, though, is the surface can be -20, -30. And so where we end up having problems and seeing issues with gear failures is even the best scuba equipment, the nicest environmentally sealed regulator is going to freeze up when it's -30 out, because when they're making regulators, they make them for the water, not for the air. And so you have this amazing regulator and it works great. It's sealed, it's, environmentally set. But if you get that wet, we see this a lot on the glacier. If you get that wet and then you come out and on the surface it's -40, which we had this happen on the glacier during a large photo shoot, actually, and it ended up being a hard thing. We had about 12 regulators fail. We were just moving regulators on tanks over the course of 2 days. And it's just because the air is so cold. And so despite how good the reg is, they're made for the water. And when you get out into the air and it's -40, it's just freezing. And so our goal is we just get into the water as quickly as we can, and we all lay on our backs with our first stages underwater so we can thaw out, because the water is 50 degrees warmer than outside.
That's crazy. And we've certainly had that. I teach ice diving, and so we have that more than often than not. But we generally have it in the lower end gear that happens first. Our high end gear doesn't really have the same issues, and we're able to get through it. But there are those times. But then again, we're pretty good that if it's 0 or below, then we call the dive, and we don't do ice diving at 0 or below.
Yeah. And and that's the one that's tough for us, is that it's 0 or below for a couple months. And so we just hope for us, our call point is -40. We won't dive below -40. But a lot of stuff starts failing at -10.
I honestly feel a bit like a princess now, because my call point is 0. Yours is -40.
That's only when we go up north. Fortunately, we're in an area that doesn't really reach that.
Oh my heck. You talk about being a princess diver. I get it completely. I hate being cold more than anything. We went to Hawaii for 10 days and I dove a 5 mil in Hawaii for 10 days, but we were doing 2.5 hour, 3 hour dives. So that also, certainly a consideration. In 76 degree water to 5 mil, everybody's like, "You're in a 5 mil wetsuit." I'm like, "Yes, I am." And and a hood. Well, I wasn't.
You have to.
But yeah, I get cold easily, and ice diving aside, I don't like being cold. So it is what it is.
Yep, I get that.
So tell me about the kind of gear you use for each kind of diving. So talk about, what are you personally diving when you dive ice?
So for ice in particular, I like to dive ice like we're diving a technical dive. So for ice, I am redundant air source in some capacity. Personal favorite for us is back-mounted doubles. And so we will use back-mounted doubles. That way, if we do have a regulator failure, We can isolate. So I can shut off one side, but still access both my tanks, and I can isolate if I need to, if for any reason I do have a valve failure. And so back mounted doubles is our personal favorite for diving ice. Obviously, I'm diving that heated setup, that same dry suit, dry gloves, heavy hood. When we teach, we'll mostly dive full face. And a lot of the reason for that is a lot of the ice diving we do a lot of ice diving, but then we also have a lot of public safety divers that work up here, train up here. One of our instructors is the head of one of the larger public safety teams in the state. And so we're always trying to keep in mind of, hey, how would we work if we were training people to do work under the ice? And so we try to keep that in mind. Up here, we actually train advanced ice and ice rescue as well, which are distinctive runs that go a little beyond the standard ice diving classes, just because we do so much ice diving throughout the winter, as well as to be able to better support public safety teams with standardized training. And so what we're looking at is we'll dive full face masks. And the main reason for that, obviously the warmth on the face is huge, but a huge benefit of diving the full face mask as well is being able to have communication. And so even when we are diving, we will almost always have, when we're teaching classes, an instructor with comms talking to the surface, because we'll run divers on individual tethers as opposed to linking a tether, because that scares us. And so we'll run all our divers on individual tethers and just being able to communicate. So if for any reason someone's like, hey, they're sinking, a lot of our ice diving sites are deep. And so it's, if someone sinks, we just say, hey, tether, can you grab diver one? And then all of a sudden the diver's just hanging from their tether on their line. And so obviously always having a line to the surface, and full face masks are great. Full face masks, we will have an issue when it's extremely, extremely cold, when we're looking at that -10, -20 range, where the second stage will freeze up, as well as the inside of the lens, if there's any moisture in there, freeze up as well. So we do a lot of practice taking our full face masks off under the ice, and all of our instructors have to at least do a full face mask to half mask switch, and then a switch back at least once at the start of the season before we teach our first class, to make sure we're feeling comfortable with that. And yeah, that's generally what our ice diving's looking like. We always have extra rigs, and then the usual stuff. We really try to do our best to have tents and places we can get warm. Nice, one of those red igloo tents are amazing, and being able to warm up in those, and then everything we can do. We always, one that we carry that's more unique than most places, because winter sports are so popular here, one from a snow machining perspective, as well as just an ice fishing perspective, or people just drive their cars across some lakes up here. We will always tag our hole when we're done. We refill the ice in, and then we go back to check to make sure that it can hold the weight of a machine. That way we're not creating any pit traps, because we're diving lakes that have public access many times. And so just making sure no one would accidentally stumble upon a hole.
That's awesome. So what's your personal favorite setup, and why do you use that setup, regs and tanks and backplate?
Yeah, so backplate and wing. We do a lot of dry suit diving, so you don't have any inflation compressing on your dry suit, which allows you more easy airflow through your dry suit, as opposed to a jacket style. So backplate and wing is always going to be our preference. I prefer personally back mounted doubles, and it is for that isolation reason, as opposed to side mount being the other more popular way of wearing dual tanks. Side mount's amazing from a weight perspective. When I travel, I love doing side mount, especially if I'm diving, in Florida and you're going through tight restrictions in caves. But for up here, because we always are worried about having free-flowing regulators as first and second stage failures alike, I prefer diving a back-mounted double setup on a long hose. And the long hose is more for me, actually, one, from a technical diving perspective, being able to work and have some space, giving longer donation if you're going through a cave, if you're sharing air while scootering, but also from a teaching perspective, being able to share air and assist other divers with their buoyancy as you're ascending, so that when we're sharing air, there's a little more room to work while teaching. And then with doubles, like mentioned earlier, just being able to isolate one tank and still use all of my gas. So if I have to shut down my right post, I can put in my necklace and still continue to breathe, still continue to work, haven't lost all my gas as I'm heading back to the surface and returning, whether it's to the hole in the ice or just returning to the beach if I'm in the ocean or the boat. And so that is my preferred setup. There's obviously lots of benefits to everything else. With that as well, we almost always will have a dry suit inflation bottle. And when it's really cold, we will fill it with argon, and we keep argon on the shore to do flushes, just with the more dense gas to keep us a little more warm. And especially if we're doing technical dives and we do have helium in our backs, it's nice to have that dry suit inflation bottle so I'm not pumping helium into my suit, because helium is so cold. And I don't want to have helium going into my dry suit as well as I'm doing any dry suit work or dry suit inflation. So favorite for diving up here would definitely be back mounted doubles. We have a lot of individuals just from an access standpoint. We have a recreational doubles course that we teach up here, which is really nice. So when it's really cold and it's -20 out, it's 2 tanks is amazing in general, because you can go out and you can do 1 hour-and-a-half long dive and then see as much as you would in 3 dives without having to have that surface interval, because our surface is so much colder than the water. And so we'll have a lot of individuals who will either do doubles, recreational doubles course that we run here, or like a self-reliant style course, or something that involves diving a stage. And so people will dive with a single tank on their back and a single tank on their side as well, and just clipped on stage, and or side mount for that matter. But that ends up just doing the same thing and maximizing your time underwater, because the coldest part of our day is our surface interval. And so we try to minimize the amount of time we spend on the surface, obviously nitrogen pending, but we try to minimize the amount of time we spend on the surface because it's cold up there. So we want to spend our time in the water.
Fair enough. Have you found one particular rig set that stands out above the rest for your cold water diving, that breathes well and freezes up the least?
So yeah, most every one of us up here, and again, this, I preface this with, there's a ton of good rig sets and a ton of good stuff. This is just what we've found. I have 5, 6 sets of the Scuba Pro Mark 25 S600 or S620. Now, they aren't an environmentally sealed first stage. So Scuba Pro fairly recently came out with the Mark 19, and the Mark 19s are amazing. And they are an environmentally sealed first stage with a swivel turret on the bottom. I prefer the piston, actually, which isn't environmentally sealed, because what I've found, and this is counterintuitive, so I always preface with, like, this is a personal preference here and not necessarily law, but what we found is with the piston regulator, even though it's not environmentally sealed, it's an environmental regulator, but it's not environmentally sealed. Water's still touching our piston. It's not a diaphragm first stage. It is, for us, when it's so cold, we will have freeze ups on the surface. It's just a given when we're diving in the coldest of coldest months. But with the pistons, we can thaw them faster. So when we sit back with our tanks underwater in our first stages in the water, they're thawing quicker than a diaphragm regulator would. So my number 1 and number 2 would be a Mark 25 environmentally sealed with an S620, just because the S620, amazing inhalation, a really good amount of adjustment you can have with the dive pre-dive and a venturi, and then that exhale is downright fantastic. And so for technical dives, not having to worry about that buildup of CO2 as much and being able to exhale easily is something a lot of divers take for granted and we don't really think about, but it's huge. And so the exhalation on the 620 I love. And then for those with the environmentally sealed, the Mark 19s would be my favorite as far as talking about an actual environmentally sealed first stage, just to protect from that freeze up and preventing that icing up. Even though it may thaw out a little longer, it will fight that freeze up a little better. So it all depends. For us, it's interesting because I start my day with the assumption that my rigs are going to free flow. And so I start with remedying it and finding out how that works. Because there's not a single rig in that cold of weather that's not gonna go on you eventually when it's, freezing. It should. That means it's working properly. And so having something that we can thaw out a little faster has been my personal approach. So Mark 25s and Mark 19s, S620s are the best, or S600s if you are worried about the titanium inside an S620.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. So Alex, what are some precautions you take to minimize the environmental impact while diving in Alaska?
Buoyancy, 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 buoyancy. So we have a ton of life on the bottom. The entire bottom is just alive and moving. And then when we're in lakes, actually, because we have so much glacial silt, it's extremely fine. And think of silty bottom, but it doesn't stop. One of our favorite lakes that we like to fun dive, we don't teach there because it is it's owned, but you can fun dive there. And so it's Matanuska Lake. Matanuska Lake is about 80 feet deep. And one of my dive buddies and I, we took a 15-foot long rod and we went down to 80 feet where the bottom is, but it's silt. And we stuck the rod all the way down to the silt, and then my arm up to my elbow, and then my dive buddy grabbed on my fin and me all the way into the silt as well. And I let go of the rod and it sank. And so even when we're diving in sites that aren't the ocean, where we don't, well, a lot of our lakes, we don't have what we would call a true bottom. I mean, it's the bottom, there's silt, but the silt is respectively infinite as far as what we say. At least I know that stops somewhere, but we'll sink into the silt and you just sink into the silt. And you can obviously, if you spread out, you can lay on top of it like you would lay on top of like a halocline or get stuck in a halocline if you're diving in a cave in Mexico. But it's just super, super thick silt. And so even when we're diving in fresh water, it's more of a concern for our own safety and making sure we don't get caught into that milkshake. And so everything is buoyancy, getting really efficient about controlling ourselves in our dry suits and controlling ourselves in our BCDs. And what that comes down to is practice. And we have some areas. So Smitty's Cove is an amazing spot. There's a part of Smitty's Cove that we practice in. This is where we work on our buoyancy. This is where we work on our control. This is where we make sure everything's efficient and smooth, so that by the time we start swimming over everything else that has a lot more life on it, we are able to not destroy it. And everything comes down, it's like a bicycle. If you're pedaling fast on a bicycle, it's easy to balance. If you're sitting still on a bicycle, it's very difficult to balance. It seems true for diving. And so if you can control your buoyancy sitting perfectly still, perfectly stationary, and not going anywhere, you definitely can control your buoyancy while swimming. And so making sure that we're just developing that from there. And then as far as environmental as well, we have a lot of cleanups that we do. Our free divers are amazing. They'll go down and explore local lakes. And once a week, we'll go into local lakes and just clean up trash and pull as much out as they can. And then we do a lot of, well, we actually just started because we'll do a lot of cleanups in general, but we just started doing like an official cleanup, which has been really nice since COVID to be able to have large groups together again, where we will go down and do harbor cleanups, just like they will in a lot of places, but they end up being a blast. We had about 80 volunteers and 50 of them were divers in the water at this last harbor cleanup. And everyone's just having a good time. They're sponsored events. We partner with a lot of environmental groups. And so we have just a ton of people from all over hanging out, diving, you know, eating, and enjoying the day. And so that we try to more as a thank you just to a lot of the local places that support us on that.
It's awesome. I appreciate that. And I think that's a good way to go. And I agree with you 100%. Buoyancy, 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 buoyancy. You can't teach that enough or have enough of it. That's for sure. We have the same issue here and with lakes and rivers and whatnot, where if you look at the bottom wrong, it explodes is our joke.
Yeah.
So we definitely get it for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you manage dive logistics and transportation in remote areas like Alaska? That's got to be quite the ordeal.
So two fronts. One is from like a class perspective, teaching perspective, guiding perspective. So when we're doing something on the recreational side, we manage those logistics by everyone has to have their own vehicle. If you're diving with us, you need a way to get there or someone to carpool with. And just because Alaska's big, really spread out, really spectacular, but really spread out. And so exploring everywhere, being able to drive to the dive site is everything. We have a lot of boats that'll take us out, so we'll get on boats and run from there. So from a recreational standpoint, it's awesome. And as long as people have ways to get to the various boats, pretty okay. From an exploration standpoint and moving standpoint, it's tough. It's really, really tough. So we have a lot of protocols that we use where we are trying to figure out what happens in case of an emergency here, there, or somewhere else. So most of us have wilderness medicine training of some capacity. A lot of our instructors, we all have medical training beyond the minimum requirements, with emphasis on being able to work on people if we are a day from help, 2 days from help, 3 days from help. And so making sure we're just being efficient on that and maximizing the safety of the locations we're at. When we do large trips, we always do give preference to having a physician or two on the boat when we're doing exploration trips. All the other logistics are tricky. We have a ton of bottles and tea bottles that we'll take with us, but when we're running, we have actually modified a fill station. And granted, I have to preface this with Ron and Brandon are two individuals who were on this trip, and they did everything. I was really moral support, for lack of a better term, on this last trip. But we did an expedition down on a shipwreck that was in about 240 feet of water. And we had, I think, 28 or 32 tea bottles. So those large bank bottles that people use with oxygen and helium in them on this boat, and 2 compressors, one that ran off gas in case the boat's electrics went out, which they ended up going out, and then a mobile blending station that Ron and Brandon put together so that we could blend all of our trimix and have everything set on the back of this boat and be able to run everything. And so on this expedition, everything was just thrown together and made as efficient as possible, as well as vast evac procedures if for any reason we did have something like someone take a bed on it. And so it's one where we just assume we're alone, and usually we base everything off saying it's a week until we can get to help, and then accepting on how much risk we're willing to take and where we're willing to take that risk and where we're not.
That's awesome. Risk management is a key. The more you can mitigate that risk down, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah,
absolutely. So what do you love most about diving in Alaska, and what keeps you coming back and staying there for more?
Yeah, it's to be honest, it's the diversity of life, the diversity of experience, the diversity of things you can see. The things that keep me staying and coming back for more from a teaching perspective is the fact that it's hard. This sounds bad, and I don't want to discredit it by any stretch, but it's extremely difficult to teach up here, because it's extremely difficult to dive up here, and I like that. I think that's really fun. I think that makes it really enjoyable. Because for me, it's extremely challenging, even after all these years of teaching, to still get out every day and not know what's going to happen, not know how my class is going to be, where we're going to do, where the struggles are going to be, because I know the water is difficult. And so for me, from a teaching perspective, that keeps me coming back, and why I love teaching up here so much, because it's the challenge, and everywhere has their own challenges. And I've found with the full dry suit at an open water level, open water divers for the first time in the ocean being in a dry suit is tricky, and it's fun. And that's what I really love from a teaching perspective. From a diving perspective, it's unexplored. And for me, my joy with diving, I love the life, I love the history, I love everything that's underwater. But that idea of exploration, pushing a new frontier, seeing part of the world with how much of the ocean is unexplored that nobody's ever seen, and a lot of this comes back to Sheck Exley's mindset, his approach to diving and approach to caves. But being able to see that and explore that in a place that a lot of people don't even think of diving in, and showing people that it's attainable. It's an attainable goal. It's not you have to be this all-star, superstar diver to be able to do it. Now, it's trickier, but it's very much attainable. And being able to watch new divers. I mean, we had divers with 15 dives under their belt who got on their personal boat and discovered a shipwreck a couple years ago. And so we're going through how to report it and show everything, because they just discovered a shipwreck in 25 feet of water just on a fun dive, because they went, let's dive here. And the fact that that's accessible and that's an option is something special. And so that's really what I love and what keeps me coming back. And the reason that Alaska is something that I will, no matter where I'm at in the world, will always consider like home diving, because it's so easy to access the unknown and dive places that no one's ever seen.
I love it. That sounds amazing. So what are some tips and advice you have for aspiring divers who want to come and dive Alaska?
Same as before for the most part, but practice. Dry suit time, and then see what you want, and then get yourself time. Understand it takes some time. Get a day or two to warm up. And if you're looking to explore, if you're looking to travel, if you're looking to see something unique, give yourself a day or so to warm up at places that we know, that are tested, that are tried and true. And then get stuff together, say what you want to do. Depending on when you're coming up, one that I always caution people on is Alaska is not what people would consider an affordable state. And so making sure you're taking that into account as well, where it's an amazing state, but due to the fact that it is harder to reach, cost can be a little more expensive. And so just being prepared for that as well, on top of dry suit time, heavy undergarment time, and just being flexible with everything. And that hurry up and wait mentality sometimes being what we do, where we get ready to the dive site and then it's like, oh, we're not diving today. And then the next day you sprint there again and it's like, okay, sweet, we can get in. And so being able to understand that it's a big state, but it's a feral state. And so we're a lot of times at the mercy of what it has to offer, which is why we love it, but also sometimes why it drives us insane, like this last weekend where we couldn't dive because the weather just got nasty.
Fair enough. That definitely happens. And I think in any cold weather environment or any environment, I mean, I've had to call dives in Florida because of too high of seas or a freaking hurricane. Really?
Exactly.
It happens. I had to call one a few weeks ago because the snow drifts were 6 feet deep and nobody could drive through them to get to the lake. So I get it. That's for sure. Can you share some tips that you have personally on cold water and ice diving that you kind of learned through the School of Hard Knocks?
Little tips. Plan on failures always. I always recommend. So some little tips are kind of gimmies, and some little tips I feel like are not. Cut a triangle, not a square. It's always nicer to get out of if you're ever stuck. You can't have enough ice screws to be able to tether your ropes. Tether every rope individually. And so, 3 divers in the water, never really more than 3 divers in the water from an entanglement standpoint. 3 divers in the water, 3 individual tethers, and tether every bag at the maximum distance you're going to be going from the hole. So if it's 130 feet, tag them out at 130 feet. And that way, even if you have a tender on the surface who disappears or something happens to the tender on the surface, the divers can still pull their slack in, hit that screw that the end of the rope is tethered to, and pull themselves out. I always recommend cardboard on the edge of the hole. Having like plywood boards, just like a 2x6 plywood board on each edge of the triangle is huge, just from a standpoint for tenders to get their feet off the ground. And so their feet aren't on the ice so that they can keep their feet a bit warmer. Also, though, from a perspective of getting out of the water and preventing a little bit of that melt back as your bubbles and the heat from your breath is starting to melt the hole back. You don't have your hole melt out quite as badly, or you at least have a platform to work with if you're trying to get out of the water. And being efficient, making sure your hole is big enough that someone can remove their gear in the water. Again, if for any reason the tenders have to leave. And then good recall procedures, good communication procedures between divers and the surface is essential. Always having a continuous line to the surface, and obviously 3 continuous lines to the surface for diving in the ice is always preference. I really don't like, sometimes it's allowed to daisy chain where it's one line and everyone's attached to one line or clip through one line. One from a buoyancy loss perspective, but two just from a communication perspective, as well as emergency. If for any reason that line does end up in the water, there's still someone else you can grab onto their line to get back to the hole. We've actually an interesting one that is slightly counterintuitive and not a bad practice, and we still do, but not teaching, focusing on not relying, creating the pinwheel in the ice, which I know is for ice instructors, they go, of course, for non-ice divers, they go, what? But you create basically a bullseye. So you create a circle and then another circle and then lines that go straight into the hole. And it gives you some semblance of navigation. So you shovel those out in the snow. So when you look up, you can see that from the surface. And not relying on that too much for navigation, because for us, we'll have really windy days where our pinwheel will disappear. And relying and focusing on the line and assuming that's more of a backup semblance of navigation and not your primary means of escape. Aside from that, the biggest thing I always tell everyone is ice is scary, and verifying it's the right amount of ice before you cut your initial hole, making sure a diver's on a tether when they walk out on the ice, because I've had days that I'm on a tether fortunately, but we're seeing if the ice is good and it's 2 feet thick, but it's pure chandelier ice that's breaking apart, or candlestick ice, sorry, that's breaking apart, and I can dig a hole with my foot through 2 feet of ice just by kicking. And so ice that is unstable, and making sure you're being gentle on it. And if you're diving in places that the ice moves and has any inlet or outlet, making sure you're doing whatever you can to, one, have recall procedures, but never let a hole close. Never let the hole close, never let the ice crack. Personally, for us, one of the, it's a pro tip that I found is really nice, is we don't actually like pushing the blocks underneath. They will freeze to the bottom if it's cold enough, but more becomes an entanglement hazard for our various lines as we're diving. And so we actually won't push our ice underneath, we pull them. And this also comes to us refilling the holes whenever we're done, but we put ice screws in every one of our individual blocks and pull it out. And I know some people do that, some people don't. For us, it's one that we always do, because as we're pulling that ice out, we put it on a tarp so it doesn't freeze to the ice. And we can, one, restore it when we're done with the day, but two, it doesn't create any entanglement on the underside of the hole when we're looking at our various tender lines. And so when we're tying in, it just makes the hole a lot safer. That way also, if the ice ever shifts, we can't collapse on a line. When the ice moves, I've seen those blocks come together underneath the ice and freeze and pinch someone's line, which means if that person needed to get drug back by their tender, they wouldn't have been able to. And so we try to keep our ice on the surface and not create any entanglements underneath the hole. Little tips. Most of those are going to be common, but
sure,
some of them aren't.
No, those are great. I appreciate it. So, Alex, we're winding down here, but tell me about your biggest oh shit moment. We all have them. What's yours?
Yeah. Biggest oh shit moment. Aside from classes, so there's always something with a class, right? Someone, we're learning how to scuba dive. So, you have a foot first descent from 50 feet because you added way too much air to your dry suit. And we're trying to fight that while there's, 3 other people underwater who are also trying to work with it. And so aside from classes and the usual of just like, hey, we're learning, we're figuring stuff out and keeping stuff safe. And obviously that stays within safety protocols, which is everything. And so maintaining safety is huge. One of the biggest moments, I would say, we had a dive. We had a technical dive, which was one of the scarier moments that ended up being, hey, this is okay. We resolve everything. We had a technical dive that we were doing, and we were down in about 200 feet, 230 feet ish, and we were coming up and we were on deco, and we had 5 tanks on us each and a scooter. And so I've got 2 tanks on my side, 1 clipped on my low D ring that's hanging between my legs. We're at the 70-foot stop, and I had just switched to a bottle of 50%. I'm starting my deco gas. And so now that I've switched, I can't go down, but I'm also observing a deco obligation. So I really can't go up. So I'm really in like the 70, I'm staying at 70 feet. I'm not going down to 71. I'm not coming up to 69. I'm just sitting at 70 feet. And so I've got a scooter that I have set. It's just like resting between my legs. I have another tank between my legs, 2 on my side, 2 on my back. I look like a yard sale. My dive buddy also looks like a yard sale because he has the exact same configuration. We did the same dive. And what happened is a diver ended up losing their buoyancy control. And so this is a large deco obligation, cold weather. So we know our nitrogen levels are going to be a little higher than what we're planning on, and we're adjusting for that. But our large deco obligation and a large buoyancy swing. And fortunately, dive buddy hadn't switched yet, but basically he launched past and then sank. And so going up and coming back down a little bit, as you know, with technical experience is all right. And we can move that a little bit on the high end, but once we switch to that bottle of 50%, we're not going to go deeper than 70 feet. We can't. The risk of CNS toxicity ends up getting too high too quickly. And so went up and then sank. And fortunately, dive buddy had not switched yet. And where it was more of an oh shit moment was as he sank past, went to grab and didn't, and went past and missed him. And dive buddy went down and grabbed him, fortunately, and drug him and swam him back to the stop and held him. And then we could both hold on to the individual. But it wasn't anything malicious or anything really negligent on the diver's side. He obviously checks like anything else, right? And he just didn't get air out of his dry suit fast enough. And it just took him a little bit. And so it ended up being a scary one. And where most of the fear was we can't do anything about it. And that's where like the dread is, right? With many technical divers, especially cave divers, have this experience where it's you can't do anything. It's like you can't go back for them. And that was the fear, and that was the heart-wrenching part of that. And granted, the whole situation lasted about 45 seconds. And you go from horrified to, okay, life is good again, like that. But then you sit on deco for another hour and 15 minutes as you're gradually ticking your way up and making sure everything's okay. And so that would probably be one of the biggest ones, aside from, the countless little things that we do when we're teaching and watching people flail up, figuring out our buoyancy in our dry suit, and you're waving to birds with your fins on the surface. Yeah, that would be one of the big ones. And then one that was kind of my own fault. When I first started getting into diving, I dove in Southern California, and so lobster was huge. And the only way for you to get a consistent lobster dinner is to go out hunting for lobster. And in the process of I had maybe 40 dives under my belt. Very green diver, very confident, right? What you lack in experience, you make up for in confidence. And so very confident, but very inexperienced diver. I was diving with a guy and not the best dive buddy. And what happened is there was a lobster trap that was broken. So it was an old lobster trap, destroyed, broken. It was just debris of it on the bottom. Because obviously you're not going to take from a lobster trap that's in good shape. But it was a destroyed, broken lobster trap, and it was mangled, but there were still like 3 lobster in there, and they'd been in there for a long time. So at first I'm like, this is awful. I mean, they're maimed, and they'd obviously been stuck in that trap for a while. So I get to this lobster trap. It's kind of under a rock, so it's trapped in this crack, and there's 3 lobster in there. So I get one out, I get another out. It's a night dive, and I go in for the third one, and my wetsuit ties up in this broken metal. And this was like one of those personal oh shit moments, because the wetsuit ties up and didn't cut me, but just ties up in the metal ties up in my wetsuit. And I'm holding a lobster in my hand. I go to pull it out, and suit holds, can't get out. And I go to signal my dive buddy, and he left me. And so I turn around to signal my dive buddy to try to get his help, and he left. And at the time, I I wasn't very smart with how I positioned my dive knife. And I had it down, basically I had it down far enough on my leg, and how I was contorted in there with my right arm, it was a right hand draw. I couldn't get to it easily with where I was at. I didn't have it both hands reachable, which was unfortunate. So I ended up trying to unthread unsuccessfully my arm from it, but it ended up taking me, by the time I got my knife out, it ended up taking me about 10 minutes to get out of the lobster trap. And I had about 700 PSI left by the time I was done, because this happened at the end of the dive, and got back to shore and lost my mind on my dive buddy as a very angry 17-year-old. But it, yeah, that was one of my scarier moments in diving for sure.
That's a good one. That's for sure. And 10 minutes in tangled up time is about 35, 40 minutes worth of, well, maybe 4 hours worth of actual time.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It was horrifying for me, especially since it was my first moment underwater where it was like, everything's perfect, like it's good. So not a great place to be.
That's a good time to have a good oh shit moment, though, is to get through with it and get through it, and how you handle it. It certainly tempers the rest of your dives for the rest of your life as well. So
makes it better.
Absolutely. Alex, so finally, what are you currently working on that we should watch out for?
So current stuff that we're playing with that's worth it is we have a few projects that we are, so on a bunch of fronts. So one, we have a bunch of projects on the exploration side that we are working on that are going to be, one, trying to see where caves play out, if they do. But we're trying to establish access, right? The community is everything. We want to make sure we're not going to show up and take advantage of a community for the diving. And so making sure we're working with the community, making sure everyone's happy, and keeping that as our priority, because we don't want to come in aggressively by any sense, especially in tight-knit areas like Alaska. And so working on that. And we actually we got reached out to a couple days ago. There's apparently a couple of old Japanese Zeros from World War II that came over the Aleutians, because Japan did occupy part of Alaska during World War II as they started moving over. And so there's a ton of military history. Granted, getting rights and permissions is tricky, but as we start doing that and start getting stuff set, there's a few Japanese Zeros that are very accessible for diving. Very inaccessible to get to the places that they're at, very accessible as far as diving skill and capability. So we're hoping to explore a few of that. There's a couple commercial airlines actually that went down that we got reached out to this week on to see, and there may be some funding put towards that to be able to go try to find these. And they're down in 200, 250 feet of water. We just need better coordinates for it, because right now it's too vague to really justify a project, because we don't like spending a week and a half on a boat with sonar. We like to, find it in a day or two if we can. So ideally some better coordinate location on it. But so a few of those as far as a Rex perspective. As far as stuff we're excited for, again, this is more from the freediving side of it, and spearfishing there's a lot of people trying to set records this year for halibut and king salmon for spearfishing. Which is something we always try to understanding from an environmental conservation standpoint. But on the other side, Alaska fishing is so ingrained in the community and the culture in Alaska that we really want to encourage it, especially in a way like spearfishing where there's zero bycatch. A really awesome way to be able to see underwater and be able to appreciate what you're doing. But then also on that side is we've started been getting utilized on an invasive mitigation, where spearfishing is an amazing way. We have a very bad problem with northern pike up here. In our local area, they're invasive. They're not invasive further up in the state, but here they're invasive. And so Fish and Game has actually been using us they tell us what lakes to go to, and then we throw 50 free divers in there, or scuba divers, just anyone who has a spear, and gets rid of pike. And I mean, me and one of my other buddies, we went out and we got about 60 pike in an hour and a half together, just because the invasive problem is really unfortunate, and then donating those to some of the hospitals that use them for meals and stuff like that, just so that everything's getting to use. So that's been one that we're actually really excited from on the free diving / spearfishing perspective. From a teaching perspective, it's coming into summertime, so we're, as far as stuff to expect, we have a lot of in the summer, a lot of professional level courses that happen. And so just people who are coming from all over to do instructor training courses up here because they want to do it in cold water, all the way down to us heading down south somewhere and being able to run those classes. So as far as stuff to expect, bunches. The sun is up. We're out of the dark season, so we're all smiles from here, and we're excited for whatever the summer is going to hold. Lots of exploring, lots of projects. We'll see what happens. Like anything else, we'll get distracted with something else. It's the joy of the industry, is you go down thinking one thing and then change your mind halfway through, and before you know it, you're focusing on living in a glacier, and if we find a glacier hole, and we're going through a glacier tunnel and trying to see how far an ice cave goes. So yeah, we don't know yet, but a lot of that stuff is a wide swath right now, as we're just trying to put together a lot of stuff. And then overall, the biggest thing that we've been working on for a few years is we're trying to get a consistent dive map for Alaska. And it's something we don't really have access to. We don't have dive sites. When people say what are dive sites, we tell people usually 3 or 4 that are common ones. But we have a few hundred dive sites. And this summer we have a plan to add about another 200-300 more viable dive sites to a map, so that we can start giving people access to where can I go, when can I go there, as they're starting to explore.
That's exciting. Exploration is definitely amazing, and I can definitely appreciate that quite a bit. That's for sure. Well, Alex, thank you so much for taking the time. It's been an amazing interview, and I feel like I've learned a lot as well, and gained considerably for this. Is there anything more we can do for you with our community?
It's awesome. No, I love what you guys are doing. I mean, I want to come visit. I really want to get down to Idaho to dive. And so, yeah, just stay around, keep diving. I always tell everyone, dive your local shops, play with your local shops, enjoy as much time as you can, and be able to explore whatever you can, because there's good diving everywhere, and just working with that so that you guys are diving, because I want to come visit and be able to play with you.
You've got a place to stay if you want to dive Idaho, or if you want to dive Yellowstone. Yellowstone Lake is an amazing dive.
I have always wanted to get there.
Anytime, that's for sure. We have elk that camp in right in front of our RV on a regular basis. We've had buffalo come and be right next to our RV. There's foxes, but the lake is amazing. There's some geothermal features that are unprecedented. It's amazing. So you are welcome anytime, and there's a room waiting for you anytime you want to come.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Alex, thank you so much for taking the time. I appreciate you.
Of course. Have a wonderful rest of your day. We'll see you soon.